I knew something was wrong the moment I heard construction equipment rumbling down Willow Creek Road on a Saturday morning in late September. My name is Zachary Xiong, and I had bought my little slice of heaven in Copper Ridge, Colorado 6 months earlier, specifically because of the natural creek that ran through the back of my 5-acre property. The sound of rushing water had become my morning meditation, my evening lullaby, and the reason I paid a premium for this particular lot in the Pine Valley Estates development. I pulled on my boots and headed down the sloping hillside behind my house, coffee mug still in hand, following the increasingly loud mechanical sounds. The September air was crisp, and the aspens were just starting to turn golden along the creek banks. When I pushed through the final stand of pines, I stopped dead in my tracks. 4 men in hard hats were operating a small excavator and a dump truck, piling massive rocks and concrete blocks directly into my creek. The water was already backing up, forming an unnatural pool where there should have been a gentle cascade over smooth river stones. "Hey!" I shouted, half running down the embankment. "What the hell are you doing?" The closest worker, a heavy-set guy with a graying beard, looked up from his clipboard. "HOA project, creek modification for aesthetic enhancement." "This is my property," I said, gesturing at the creek bed. "You can't just dam up a natural waterway without permission." "Actually," came a sharp voice from behind me, "this is HOA common area. The creek itself is designated as a community water feature in your covenant agreements." I turned to see a woman in her late 40s, dressed in pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the Pine Valley Estates logo embroidered on the chest. Her blonde hair was cut in that aggressive asymmetrical bob that screamed middle management, and her smile had all the warmth of a parking ticket. "And you are?" I asked. "Sharon Patterson, HOA president. We sent out notices about this project 3 weeks ago. The board voted to create a more aesthetically pleasing lake feature visible from the new clubhouse. The current creek configuration doesn't provide adequate water views for the premium members who use the facility." I felt my jaw clench. I never got any notice, and even if the creek is technically common area, you can't just block it. "Do you have any idea what happens when spring runoff comes down from the mountains?" Sharon's smile turned condescending. "Mr. Xiong, we consulted with a landscape architect from Denver. This is a professionally designed water feature that will increase property values for everyone in Pine Valley Estates. You should be thanking us. Thanking you for damming up a natural creek that's been here for thousands of years. That creek drains at least 15 square miles of watershed from the national forest above us. The dam is designed to create a picturesque lake approximately 3 acres in size," Sharon said, pulling out her phone to show me glossy renderings. "See, it will be beautiful. Much better than a noisy creek." I looked at the renderings. They showed a serene lake with a dock, surrounded by manicured lawns, with the Pine Valley Estates clubhouse prominently positioned on a small hill overlooking the water. It looked like something from a resort brochure. It also looked like a disaster waiting to happen. "Where's the spillway?" I asked. "The what?" "The spillway. The overflow channel. What happens when this lake fills up during spring melt?" Sharon waved her hand dismissively. "The lake will hold the water, that's the entire point." I ran my hand through my hair, trying to stay calm. "Sharon, I'm a hydrological engineer. That's literally what I do for a living. I design water management systems for mining operations. That creek can carry 10 times this volume during peak runoff season, which happens in April and May when the snowpack melts. If you block it without proper overflow infrastructure, you're going to flood everything downstream. Well, I'm sure you're very good at whatever it is you do for those mining companies." Sharon said with barely concealed disdain, "but we have actual professionals handling this project. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have work to do. And please stay off the construction area. It's a liability issue." I stood there watching them work for another 20 minutes, my coffee going cold in my hand. The dam was going up quickly, just a pile of rocks and concrete rubble really, held in place by the creek banks on either side. Behind it, the water was already pooling, spreading out into the natural depression that had once been a meadow. By the time I walked back to my house, I was already planning my next move. I spent the rest of the weekend researching Colorado water law, county regulations, and HOA covenant limitations. What I found wasn't encouraging. The original development agreement for Pine Valley Estates did technically designate the creek as a common area, though I was certain that designation was never meant to authorize damming it. But proving that would require legal action, which meant lawyers, which meant money I didn't have to spare right after buying a house. Monday morning, I called the Copper Ridge County Planning Department. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached someone named Bill who seemed to know what he was talking about. "Yeah, we got a permit application for that," Bill said, and I could hear him typing. "Creek modification for aesthetic purposes. Says here it's a low-impact landscaping project." Low impact. They're building a dam. The application describes it as a minor water retention feature for decorative purposes. Looking at the plans they submitted, the footprint is just under the threshold that would trigger a full environmental review. Who approved this? Counter clerk, based on the submitted documents. If what you're describing is different from what they applied for, that's a code violation. You'd need to file a formal complaint and we'd send an inspector. I filed the complaint on the spot, giving Bill my contact information and a detailed description of what the HOA was actually building. He said an inspector would be out within 10 business days. 10 days. The dam had gone up in one. That evening, I attended my first HOA board meeting. It was held in the Clubhouse, the same building that would supposedly benefit from the new lake views. The Clubhouse was absurdly fancy for a development of only 43 homes. It had a full gym, a meeting room with a stone fireplace, a commercial kitchen, and a basement level that housed a game room and storage. The whole thing sat on a small rise about 200 yards downstream from where they had built the dam. Sharon ran the meeting with the efficiency of a corporate executive. There were 4 other board members, 2 other middle-aged women who nodded along with everything Sharon said, a retired lawyer named Frank Delgado who actually seemed reasonable, and a younger guy named Brett who spent most of the meeting on his phone. When we got to the open comment period, I stood up. "I want to talk about the creek dam," I said. "Creek enhancement," Sharon corrected. "Let's use proper terminology." "Fine. Creek enhancement. I filed a complaint with the county because the project as built doesn't match the permit application. You described it as minor landscaping, but you're fundamentally altering a natural waterway that drains a significant portion of the mountain watershed." Frank Delgado leaned forward. "What specifically concerns you, Mr. Xiong?" "Spring runoff. That creek can carry 20 to 30 times its current flow during peak melt season. Your dam has no spillway, no overflow protection, and no capacity calculations that I can see. When the water comes down in April, it's going to overtop your dam and either blow it out completely or flood everything downstream, including this building." One of the other board members, a woman named Brenda, laughed. "The clubhouse is on a hill. Water flows downhill, not up." "The clubhouse basement is below grade," I pointed out. "And yes, water flows downhill, which means when your artificial lake overflows, it's going to flow directly toward this building and everything else downstream. My house included. Sharon stood up. Mr. Xiong, I appreciate your passion, but spreading alarmist predictions about a professionally designed amenity isn't helpful. The board conducted due diligence. We have permits. We have professional consultations. What we don't need is fear-mongering from someone who just moved here and thinks he knows better than the entire board. I'm not fear-mongering. I'm trying to prevent a disaster. Your objection is noted, Sharon said with finality. Is there any other business? I left the meeting frustrated and angry. In the parking lot, Frank Delgado caught up with me. Hey, Zachary, right? Look, I hear what you're saying, I really do. But Sharon's been running this HOA for 6 years. She gets things done. That clubhouse, that was her project, the new entrance gate. Her idea. She's got a vision for this place and most of the homeowners like it. Even if her vision causes flooding, Frank sighed. You got any documentation, engineering reports, something official? I could put together an analysis. Do that. Bring it to the next meeting with actual numbers. Sharon responds to data. And maybe tone down the doomsday stuff. You catch more flies with honey, you know. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into documenting everything. I pulled USC's topographical maps, historical creek flow data from the National Weather Service, snowpack statistics from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and satellite imagery showing the watershed above Pine Valley Estates. I created models showing projected spring runoff based on average snowpack years, above average years, and worst-case scenarios. The data was damning. In an average year, the creek could be expected to carry approximately 15,000 gallons per minute during peak runoff. The dam Sharon had built created a reservoir with a capacity of roughly 8 million gallons before overflow. That sounded like a lot until you did the math and realized that during a sustained heavy runoff period, that reservoir could fill in less than 9 hours. And once it filled, all that water had nowhere to go except over the top of the dam. The county inspector came out on day 9. I watched from my back deck as a man in a county truck spent about 30 minutes looking at the dam, taking photos and making notes. 2 days later, I got a call. Mr. Xiong, this is Bill from County Planning. Our inspector looked at your complaint regarding the Pine Valley Creek modification. And he found that, while the structure is somewhat larger than the permit application suggested, it still falls within the technical parameters of what was approved. The HOA has a right to modify common areas within their property boundaries. Did he look at the watershed? The runoff potential? That's outside the scope of a permit compliance inspection. If you have concerns about flooding or water management, you need to take that up with the HOA directly or pursue a civil complaint. After I hung up, I sat on my back porch and stared at the new lake. It was actually pretty, I had to admit. The water had spread out to cover about 3 acres, just like Sharon's renderings had shown. Ducks had already found it. The surface reflected the pine-covered mountains and the bright October sky. It looked peaceful. It looked like a time bomb. I spent that evening preparing a detailed presentation for the next HOA meeting. Charts, graphs, flow calculations, historical data, everything I could think of to make my case. I even included photos of other dam failures in Colorado, including the famous 1976 Big Thompson flood that killed 144 people, though that was river flooding, not a dam failure. Still, it made the point about underestimating mountain runoff. The October HOA meeting had a bigger turnout than usual. Word had spread about the guy complaining about the lake, and apparently people wanted to see the drama. I recognized most of my neighbors by sight if not by name. There was Linda Martinez, who lived in the house 2 properties over, an artist who painted landscapes. There was the couple from the corner lot who had 3 golden retrievers. The tech guy who drove a Tesla and kept to himself. When Sharon called for open comments, I was ready. I stood up and launched into my presentation, explaining watershed dynamics, peak flow calculations, and reservoir capacity. I showed my charts. I explained how spring runoff worked in the Colorado Rockies. I detailed exactly what would happen when 8 hours of sustained peak flow met a dam with no spillway. About 5 minutes in, I could see eyes glazing over. The technical details that seemed so important to me were clearly boring to everyone else. I tried to simplify. Look, the bottom line is simple. Next spring, when the snow melts, this lake is going to overflow, and when it does, the water has to go somewhere. Based on the topography, it's going to flow directly toward the clubhouse and the properties on the lower end of the development. We need to build a proper spillway now before winter, or we're going to have major flooding. Thank you for that detailed analysis, Sharon said when I finished. I'd like to address a few points. First, Mr. Xiong is correct that he has expertise in water management. However, his experience is in industrial mining operations, not residential landscaping. Second, the board did consult with professionals before approving this project. Third, and most importantly, the lake has been a tremendous success. We've had nothing but positive feedback from homeowners. It's increased our property values and created a true resort-style amenity. But what about the spring runoff? I pressed. We'll monitor the situation, Sharon said. If adjustments need to be made, we'll make them. But I'm not going to authorize spending HOA funds to modify a beautiful new amenity based on hypothetical scenarios. Now, is there any other business? Linda Martinez raised her hand. I actually think Zachary makes some good points. I've lived in Colorado my whole life, and spring runoff is no joke. Would it hurt to have someone at least look at adding an overflow channel? Sharon's smile tightened. Linda, we've already spent $40,000 on this project, which was the allocated budget. Any additional work would require either a special assessment or taking funds from our reserve account. I don't think homeowners want to see their HOA dues increase because of unfounded concerns. Unfounded, I said. I just gave you 30 minutes of data. You gave us speculation and worst-case scenarios, Sharon countered. I could stand here and speculate about all kinds of disasters. What if a meteor hits the clubhouse? Should we build a bunker? This board deals with reality, not paranoia. The meeting moved on. I sat down, defeated. Frank gave me a sympathetic look but said nothing. October turned to November. The aspen leaves fell, and the first snows dusted the peaks above us. The lake froze over, a sheet of ice that reflected the gray winter sky. I watched it from my back windows, thinking about what lay beneath that frozen surface. I tried one more avenue. I contacted a law firm in Denver that specialized in HOA disputes. The consultation cost $200 and lasted 30 minutes. Here's the problem, the lawyer, a sharp woman named Jessica Chen, told me over Zoom. HOAs have broad authority to manage common areas. Unless you can prove they are creating an imminent danger, courts are very reluctant to interfere. And imminent means right now, not 6 months from now. So I have to wait until the flooding actually happens. Basically, yes. Then you'd have grounds for a lawsuit based on negligence or property damage, but preventing something that hasn't happened yet, that's much harder. You could try for an injunction, but you'd need to convince a judge that the danger is clear and present. Based on what you've told me, you've got data showing potential risk, but nothing definitive. Any half-decent defense attorney would tear that apart. What if I'm right and people's homes get flooded? Then you'd have an excellent case for damages after the fact. But Colorado law doesn't really allow you to force preventative action based on projected risk in an HOA context. My advice: document everything. Take photos, save all your emails and meeting minutes, keep records of your warnings. If flooding does occur, you'll want to show that you raised the alarm and were ignored. That helps establish negligence. I spent November and December documenting everything. I took photos of the dam weekly, noting the water levels and any changes. I emailed the HOA board every 2 weeks with polite reminders about the need for a spillway. Sharon responded to the first 2 emails with brief dismissals. After that, she stopped responding at all. Winter in the Colorado mountains is beautiful. Snow piled up in the high country, building the snowpack that would eventually feed every creek, stream, and river on the western slope. I checked the NRCS snow telemetry data obsessively. By late March, the snowpack was at 127% of average. It had been a wet winter. The first warm spell hit in early April. Temperatures climbed into the 60s, and I could hear the creek coming back to life, the ice melting, the flow increasing. The lake levels started rising. I sent another email to Sharon. Water level up 8 inches this week. Peak runoff still ahead. Please consider emergency spillway construction. No response. By mid-April, daytime temperatures were in the 70s. The snow was melting fast in the high country. The creek was running high and loud, pouring into the lake. The water level was rising visibly day by day. I ran into Linda Martinez at the mailboxes. "You see the lake?" she asked. "It's getting pretty full." "It's going to overflow," I said. "Probably in the next 2 weeks." "Have you talked to Sharon?" "She won't listen," Linda frowned. "My studio is in my basement. If there's flooding, I've got about 50 paintings down there worth a couple $100,000. Maybe I should move them." "That might be smart. This is ridiculous. She can't just ignore a legitimate safety issue. Watch her." The last week of April brought a heat wave. Temperatures hit the low 80s and the snowpack melted like it was July. The creek became a torrent, white water rushing down from the mountains. The lake swelled. On April 28th, the water reached the top of the dam. I was standing on my back deck, coffee in hand, watching it happen. The lake had transformed from a peaceful pond into a vast reservoir, the water lapping at the grass line where Sharon's manicured lawns had been. And now, for the first time, water was trickling over the top of the rock dam. I grabbed my phone and called Sharon directly. It went to voicemail. "Sharon, this is Zachary Xiong. The lake is overtopping the dam right now. This is what I warned about. You need to evacuate the clubhouse basement immediately and start moving things to higher ground. This is not a drill." Then I called Frank Delgado. He actually answered. "Frank, the dam is overtopping. We're going to have flooding. You need to get the board mobilized to start damage control." "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. Look at the lake right now. Go online and check the flow rate data for Willow Creek. We're at peak runoff and it's only going to get worse over the next few days." Okay, let me call Sharon." I already called her. She's not answering." "I'll try her, and I'll head down to the clubhouse to check it out." I grabbed my camera and headed down to the dam on foot. The trickle I'd seen from my deck was now a steady flow, water pouring over the rocks and rushing downhill toward the clubhouse. The ground was already saturated, and new channels were forming in the grass, little streams finding the path of least resistance. I followed the water. It flowed down the gentle slope, gathering volume and speed, heading directly for the clubhouse parking lot. The building's basement was partially below grade, with window wells on the downhill side. I could see water already pooling in those wells. Frank's truck pulled into the parking lot just as I arrived. He got out and stared at the water flowing across the pavement. "Jesus Christ," he said. "It's going to get worse," I told him. "This is just the beginning. We're supposed to have high temps for the next 4 days." "Is the basement door locked?" "Probably." Frank pulled out his phone. "I'm on the board. I've got the access codes." We went to the basement entrance, a door at the bottom of a concrete stairwell on the building's lower side. The stairwell was already filling with water, 6 inches deep and rising. Frank waded down and punched in the code. The door opened, and water started flowing into the basement. Inside was worse than I'd imagined. The basement was carpeted, with drywall walls and a drop ceiling. There was expensive gym equipment, a pool table, leather furniture. And water was already seeping in around the foundation, dark stains spreading across the carpet. "We need to start moving things," Frank said. "We need about 10 people and a truck," I replied. Frank started making calls. I went back outside to assess the water flow. In the 20 minutes we'd been in the basement, the overflow had increased dramatically. What had been a trickle was now a steady stream, and the lake showed no signs of slowing down. The creek was still pouring water in faster than the overflow could drain it. Sharon arrived 30 minutes later, driving her Lexus SUV right up to the edge of the flowing water. She got out looking furious. "What is going on here?" she demanded. "The lake is overflowing," I said, keeping my voice level. "Exactly as predicted. We need to get everything out of the basement before it floods completely. This is unacceptable. The dam should be holding." "Sharon, the dam is holding. It's just full. There's nowhere else for the water to go." She stared at the water rushing past, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked uncertain. "How long will this last?" Based on the weather forecast and snowpack data. 3 to 5 days of heavy overflow, then gradually decreasing over the following week. But the damage is happening right now. By the time the sun set that evening, we had a crew of 7 homeowners working to empty the basement. We moved gym equipment, furniture, boxes of HOA records, holiday decorations, everything we could reach. The water kept rising. By 9 p.m., the basement had 6 inches of standing water throughout. By midnight, it was over a foot. I finally went home at 2 in the morning, exhausted and soaked. From my back deck, I could see lights at the clubhouse where people were still working. The sound of the creek was deafening, a roar that drowned out everything else. The next morning, the basement had 4 feet of water. The overflow from the dam was now a substantial stream, cutting deep channels in the lawn, undermining the parking lot, and pouring into the clubhouse stairwell like a waterfall. There was nothing to be done but watch. Sharon called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon, held in the main level of the clubhouse since the basement was uninhabitable. Every homeowner in Pine Valley Estates showed up. Sharon looked haggard. Her perfect hair was disheveled, and she was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt instead of her usual polo shirt uniform. "As you all know, we're experiencing flooding from the lake amenity," she began. "The basement has sustained significant water damage. We're working with our insurance company to assess the situation." "This is exactly what Zachary warned us about," Linda Martinez said loudly. "He told us this would happen back in October." "Thank you, Linda, but hindsight doesn't help us right now." "Actually," I said, standing up, "foresight tried to help us 6 months ago. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? The overflow is going to continue for at least another week. We need to either breach the dam to drain the lake, or dig a proper spillway to divert the overflow away from the clubhouse." "Breaching the dam would destroy our lake amenity," Sharon protested. "Your lake amenity just destroyed your clubhouse basement," I shot back. and it's going to keep causing damage until we deal with it. This isn't about aesthetics anymore. This is about basic water management. Frank spoke up. I've been doing some research. Sharon, did you know that Colorado law requires any dam over 6 feet high or with a capacity over 50 acre-feet to be registered with the state and regularly inspected? Sharon went pale. The landscape architect said we didn't need permits beyond basic land modification. Well, that landscape architect was wrong. Our dam is almost 8 feet high and holds significantly more than 50 acre-feet. We should have had a state dam safety inspection. We could be looking at serious legal liability here. The room erupted in cross-talk. Homeowners were angry, scared, confused. Someone mentioned lawyers. Someone else started calculating what the repairs would cost. Sharon held up her hands. Everyone, please, we'll fix this. I'll contact emergency contractors today to dig a spillway. And we'll investigate our legal options regarding the landscape architect who gave us bad information. What about criminal charges? Asked a homeowner I didn't recognize. Criminal charges for what? Sharon said defensively. For knowingly creating a dangerous situation. Zachary warned you. There are emails, meeting minutes. You were told this would happen and you ignored it. Sharon's face flushed red. I acted on professional advice and board authority. There's nothing criminal about that. I stood up again. Look, I don't care about blame right now. I care about stopping the damage. Sharon, you said you'll hire contractors. When? I'll make calls this afternoon. Make them now. Every hour we wait, more water flows into that basement, and start looking at the properties downstream. My house is on a slope, so I'm probably okay, but there are 4 houses lower than the clubhouse that could flood if this continues. That got people moving. Sharon started making calls. Frank organized teams to help the homeowners in the low-lying properties move valuables to upper floors. I went back to the dam to figure out the best place for a spillway. The contractor Sharon found was a guy named Miguel who ran an excavation company out of Copper Ridge. He took one look at the situation and whistled low. You want me to dig a spillway while that lake is full? That's going to be tricky and expensive. How expensive? Sharon asked. Emergency weekend work. Excavation, rock placement for erosion control, probably need a concrete channel to handle that flow rate. I'd say $35,000 minimum, maybe $50,000 depending on what we run into. Sharon looked like she might be sick. The HOA reserve fund has $42,000. Then you better hope we don't run into bedrock, Miguel said. He started work that afternoon with a crew of 4 and 2 excavators. I stayed to consult, helping him map out the best route for the spillway. The plan was to cut a channel starting about 20 feet south of the dam, angling it to direct the overflow away from the clubhouse and toward an existing drainage area that fed into a different branch of the original creek. The excavation took 2 days of round-the-clock work. Miguel's crew worked in shifts, floodlights illuminating the construction site at night. The sound of diesel engines and moving earth joined the roar of the water. Homeowners came down in shifts to watch, standing around in small groups, talking in low voices about property values and insurance claims, and whether Sharon should resign. The spillway finally came online on May 2nd. The channel was about 30 feet long and 6 feet wide, lined with concrete and reinforced with riprap at the outlet. When Miguel's excavator made the final cut connecting it to the lake, water rushed into the new channel with enough force to make everyone step back. The flow was incredible, white water racing down the concrete spillway and safely away from the clubhouse. Within 6 hours, the lake level dropped 3 feet. The overflow across the dam slowed to a trickle, then stopped. Water continued to pour from the spillway, but now it was directed, controlled, flowing where we wanted it instead of carving its own destructive path. The basement remained flooded, but at least it stopped getting worse. Miguel's final bill came to $48,000. The HOA reserve fund was wiped out. Sharon had to approve a special assessment of $1,100 per household to cover the shortfall and begin basement repairs. That's when the lawyers got involved. I received a letter from a Denver law firm representing Sharon and the HOA board. It alleged that I had interfered with HOA business, spread false information, and contributed to panic that led to unnecessary expenditures. It demanded that I cease all communication about water management issues and threatened legal action if I continued to harass the board. I called Jessica Chen, the HOA attorney I'd consulted back in November. "They're trying to intimidate you into silence," she said after I read her the letter. "Don't respond directly. Let me handle it." Jessica sent a reply that was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. She outlined my qualifications as a hydrological engineer, cited my numerous documented warnings that had been ignored, referenced the Colorado dam safety laws that the HOA had violated, and strongly suggested that the board might want to reconsider who bore legal responsibility for the flooding damage. The HOA's lawyer went quiet after that, but the state of Colorado was just getting started. Apparently, someone had reported the unregistered dam to the Colorado Division of Water Resources. I suspected it was Frank, though he never admitted it. In mid-May, 2 state dam safety engineers showed up at Pine Valley Estates with clipboards, cameras, and serious expressions. They spent 3 hours examining the dam, the spillway, the clubhouse damage, and the original creek configuration. They took water samples, surveyed elevations, and reviewed what little documentation the HOA could provide about the dam's construction. A week later, Sharon received a notice of violation from the state. The dam was operating without required permits, had been constructed without a state-approved design, lacked proper safety features, and posed a potential hazard to downstream properties. The HOA was ordered to either bring the dam into compliance with state safety standards or remove it entirely within 90 days. The compliance cost estimate was staggering: $250,000 for proper engineering studies, reconstruction to state standards, installation of monitoring equipment, and establishment of an emergency action plan. The HOA didn't have $250,000. Even with a special assessment, scraping together that kind of money would require levying several $1,000s per household. At the June board meeting, Sharon announced her resignation. "This has been an incredibly difficult year," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I tried to do what I thought was best for our community. I made mistakes and I take responsibility for them, but I can't continue to serve effectively given the current situation. I'm stepping down as president effective immediately." There was no applause, no protest, just uncomfortable silence. Frank was elected interim president. His first act was to call a vote on the dam's future. The choice was simple: spend $250,000 to make it legal or tear it down and restore the creek. The vote was 38-5 in favor of removal. Miguel's crew came back in July. This time they weren't building anything, they were demolishing. The rocks and concrete that had formed the dam were excavated and hauled away. The original creek bed was restored using historical photos and USC survey data that I provided. Native vegetation was replanted. Erosion control measures were installed. By August, you could barely tell the dam had ever existed. The creek flowed free again, tumbling over smooth stones, creating the same rushing water soundtrack I'd bought the property to enjoy. The clubhouse basement was another story. The flooding had caused over $90,000 in damage. Carpet, drywall, electrical systems, and HVAC equipment all had to be replaced. The insurance company paid $60,000 after a lengthy investigation. They denied the remaining $30,000 based on a clause excluding damage from earth movement or water backup from improper construction. The HOA sued the landscape architect from Denver who had designed the dam. That case was still pending when I heard he'd filed for bankruptcy. Linda Martinez sued the HOA for damage to her paintings. 4 had been destroyed when her basement flooded. The HOA settled for $75,000 rather than go to trial. The special assessments kept coming. By September, homeowners had each paid almost $4,000 in extra fees to cover the dam removal, basement repairs, and legal costs. Property values in Pine Valley estates dropped 18% over the following year. People trying to sell had to disclose the flooding, the dam violation, and the ongoing legal issues. Buyers wanted steep discounts or walked away entirely. Sharon moved away. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she'd taken a job in Arizona. She sold her house for $100,000 less than she'd paid for it, but the state wasn't quite done yet. In October, the Colorado Division of Water Resources referred the case to the Copper Ridge County District Attorney's Office for criminal review. Operating an unpermitted dam that violated state safety laws and caused property damage was potentially a Class 2 misdemeanor. I was interviewed by an assistant DA named Robert Tanaka. He was young, serious, and thorough. "Walk me through the timeline," he said. "When did you first warn the HOA about the danger?" I pulled out my documentation. Emails, meeting minutes, photos, technical reports. Everything I'd been compiling for almost a year. "This is good," Robert said, paging through the file. "Very thorough, and they ignored all of this. Every word. Multiple times. What about the other board members? Who besides Sharon Patterson was involved in approving the dam?" I named them. Brenda, the woman who'd laughed at my concerns. Brett, who'd been on his phone. Frank had actually been opposed, I explained, but had been outvoted. "Frank tried to bring up safety concerns at several meetings," I said. "But Sharon controlled the board. She had the votes to push through whatever she wanted." Robert made notes. "This looks like reckless endangerment at minimum, possibly criminal negligence given the willful disregard for multiple warnings from a qualified expert. The property damage and costs to other homeowners are substantial. I'm going to recommend charges." The criminal complaint was filed in December. Sharon Patterson was charged with reckless endangerment and willful violation of water safety statutes. Brenda was charged as an accomplice. Brett's lawyer negotiated immunity in exchange for testimony about how Sharon had controlled board decisions. The trial was set for March, almost exactly a year after the flooding. I was called as an expert witness. The prosecution had me explain watershed dynamics, runoff calculations, and dam safety requirements. I walked the jury through my warnings, the data I'd provided, and Sharon's repeated dismissals of the danger. Sharon's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd relied on professional advice from the landscape architect, that she couldn't have known the dam was dangerous, that the flooding was an unforeseeable natural disaster. The prosecution brought out my emails. Meeting minutes where I'd explained exactly what would happen. Technical reports showing the precise mechanism of failure. Weather data proving the runoff was utterly predictable. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on both counts. Sharon was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, suspended to probation, 300 hours of community service, and restitution payments totaling $40,000 to be split among affected homeowners. Brenda got probation and a fine. By the time the legal proceedings finally wrapped up, it was spring again. I stood on my back deck on a warm April morning, coffee in hand, listening to the creek. The water was running high with runoff, just like it had the year before. But this time it flowed free and natural, following the path it had carved over thousands of years. The Pine Valley Estates HOA had a new board, new rules requiring engineering review for any construction project, and new bylaws limiting the president's authority to approve major expenditures without a supermajority vote. Frank had stayed on as president, determined to rebuild the community's stability. Property values were slowly recovering. The clubhouse basement, after 9 months of repairs, was finally back in use. The resort-style amenity was now the creek itself, marketed to potential buyers as a natural water feature with authentic Colorado character. I ran into Frank at the mailboxes one afternoon in May. "You know," he said, "I never properly thanked you for being right." "I wish I'd been wrong," I said. "Sharon's appeal was denied yesterday. It's finally over." "How's the neighborhood doing?" "Better. Slowly. We'll recover. But I think everyone learned a valuable lesson about the difference between vision and reality." I thought about that as I walked back to my house. Sharon had wanted to create something beautiful, something that would make Pine Valley Estate special. She hadn't been malicious, just arrogant. She'd believed her vision was more important than natural law, that professional-sounding credentials mattered more than actual expertise, that aesthetic appeal could trump physics. She'd learned otherwise the hard way. That evening, I sat on my back deck and watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. The creek sang its ancient song, the sound of snowmelt and gravity, and the endless cycle of water seeking its level. It was the same song it had sung for millennia before Pine Valley Estates existed, and the same song it would sing long after all of us were gone. There's a reason water law in the West is so complex, so carefully regulated, so deeply serious. Water is life, but it's also power. It carves canyons, moves mountains, and doesn't give a damn about property values or HOA aesthetic standards. You can work with it, channel it, manage it with respect and expertise. But you can't just dam it up because you want a prettier view. I learned that in engineering school. Sharon Patterson learned it in court. The mountain creek still flows through my property, and every morning I stand on my deck with my coffee and listen to it rush past. It's the sound of nature doing exactly what nature does, following laws older and more immutable than any HOA covenant could ever be. Sometimes I wonder if Sharon ever thinks about that, in whatever Arizona subdivision she ended up in. Probably not. But I think about it every single day, and I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the creek, for the mountains, for the fundamental reality that some things can't be controlled by committee votes and landscape architects with glossy renderings. The water flows downhill. It always has, and it always will. And trying to change that without proper expertise, proper planning, and proper respect is a recipe for disaster. I'm just glad the only thing that flooded was a basement full of gym equipment and not someone's home. We were lucky. It could have been so much worse. But it was bad enough that Pine Valley Estates will never forget what happens when an HOA president decides that appearance matters more than engineering, that professional titles matter more than actual knowledge, that vision matters more than physics. They damned my creek for lake views. Spring runoff flooded their clubhouse basement. And now we all live with the consequences, the legal bills, the insurance claims, and the hard-won knowledge that Mother Nature always bats last. Frank tells me they're putting up a plaque at the clubhouse commemorating the Great Flood of 2025, as a reminder to future boards about the importance of listening to experts. I told him they should just call it, "What happens when you ignore the engineer?" He said that wouldn't fit on a plaque. I said that was the whole point. The creek still flows, indifferent to our human drama, following the path it's followed for thousands of years. And every morning when I hear that rushing water, I'm reminded that some things are bigger than HOAs, bigger than aesthetic visions, bigger than all of us. Water finds its way. One way or another, it always does.